Hey internets, it's Jake, and today I'm going to show you how to make miniature tents for your miniature campsites. The template for our tent is going to be 3.5 inches by 3 inches. I've already made some markings on here, so I'm going to go ahead and mark off at 3.5 inches, and I also marked at the 3/4 inch mark from each end and connected those lines. Now on our 3-inch measurement, I'm measuring 1.5 inches to find the center fold line for the tent. I'm going to also mark 3/4 inch from each end on the outer edges. And then I'm going to use the ruler to draw from each of the tent halves to complete the halves of the tent pieces. You can see where I've marked the 3/4 inch marks that you connect to the halfway point. Every one of these lines is going to be a fold line. And right here I'm making a tab for the back side of the tent where it's going to be glued together. So I measure up 1/4 inch on each side, and then using the ruler I connect those two pieces together. Of course, this is pretty self-explanatory. All of the lines I marked, I'm going to go ahead and cut carefully along each of those lines until we've completely cut out our pattern. Be careful not to cut into your tent. If you do a little bit, it shouldn't matter too much because we're going to be covering it later. You should be able to cover up those. Now for this, I'm going to use very light pressure with my X-Acto blade to lightly score all of the fold lines. As you can see, it makes it much easier to fold exactly where I want each piece to fold. We'll fold this little tab over for the back side of the tent, put a little bit of PVA glue on there, hold it together for a minute until it sticks, and you're good to go. This is where your paper towel is going to come in and your PVA and water mixture. I placed the tent structure on the paper towel to get a rough estimate of how big I need it. I'm going to cut a slit where it's going to go over the door. Thoroughly soak it in the PVA and water, and then I wring it out a bit. Carefully unfold it so as not to tear it. And then you lay it carefully over the tent structure. Let me get back in camera here. I'm carefully folding it in along the edges, making a little bit of a pseudo flap crease on the back side. And a little bit of wrinkles are fine because that's going to give us our texture. Ultimately though, we don't want too much sagging or bagginess. I'm going to cut this strip out, set it aside for now. I'll come back to that in a minute. And I'm going to put a second layer on. This is just going to give it some more strength, and it's going to help to add to the textures. Using the exact same process we did for the first time, again making that pseudo flap on the back to simulate a flap of a tent, and it helps it to fold together neatly, carefully securing it to the cardboard. Put a little coating of PVA glue on there, and I'm going to use my paintbrush with the PVA glue mixture to help it spread on evenly. This is going to help to strengthen the whole thing. Once it hardens, dries, it'll harden pretty nicely. Now here, I'm simulating patches on the side of my tent. This is a well-worn adventurer's tent. So I take a little piece of the paper towel, place it into the wet glue, and then I'm just brushing a little bit more on there to help it to blend in. So it'll pretty much fuse with the rest of the structure. Now you could spray paint these black, gray, or any color you want to. I chose to use a light dolphin gray with a wet paintbrush to prime mine a light gray. It's a light colored tent, light colored canvas that I wanted to go with, so I felt that this was a good color to prime with. And make sure you get on the inside of your open flap. And then I use a khaki, once that was dry, to go over the whole thing. I'm choosing to go with a kind of a khaki canvas color, but you could use really any color you wanted to. You're going to want to use variations and lighter shades of that for your highlights later on though. Now to paint the patches. Here I've chosen a Tuscan red, and I'm using a flat brush to carefully outline the patch, which had kind of blended in, makes it a little difficult to find, and then paint in the lines like in a coloring book to fill in that patch. Now I'm going to weather this with I'm making my own wash from a burnt umber and a lot of water. If you look closely, you can see that I had actually attempted a nutmeg wash, that it gave it too much of an orange look and I didn't care for it. So here I'm liking the way that this wash is going on. I want this to be dirty. I want this to be a well-worn adventurer's tent, so I want it to have a dirt look to it. So I'm just letting that wash go over. Here I'm just kind of pressing against the peak of the roof of the tent, letting it run down the sides. Now you got to be careful because it will pool along the bottoms, so I went ahead and just kind of brushed that away. Now I'm using a linen to go along the edges, less like highlights and more to indicate wear from constant folding and stuff. And then I'm gonna go ahead and with a very dry brush, I'm gonna give the whole thing a dry brush treatment with this linen to just kind of bring some of those edges on the texturing out. Make sure to get the whole tent. Now you could stop here and your tents would be just fine on their own, but if you wanted to give them a little extra flair, you can add a base to your tent. Here I'm using a heavy cardstock and just kind of tracing the pattern around, smoothing it out with my pencil to make sure I like the shape. Now these scissors are not the best for cutting this heavy duty cardstock, cardboard really. I need to get a little bit better scissors. Kind of mangled up the edges a little bit, but that's okay. I got some sandpaper, so I went ahead and hit up the edges on that just to kind of smooth it out. Test fitting the tent onto the cardstock, and I'm going to use PVA glue to coat it and a little bit of my wet PVA water mixture to spread that evenly all over the piece of cardstock. Now really I didn't need to go into the center because it's going to be hidden by the tent. That's your choice. This dirt was from my backyard. It's free, so I don't worry about wasting it too much. These are some of the slightly larger pebbles from inside the sand I'd separated before. And now I'm going to cover the whole thing with the sand. You could use ordinary play sand, something from a playground, beach, whatever you have. Dump the excess off, and there's our base. Now you could choose to paint that and highlight and texture it. I like the look of the sand, so I'm going to stick with that. Here I'm finding the edges. And notice I'm going in a horseshoe because I want the opening of the tent to look like it's a little bit worn. Maybe the grass is trampled down or something like that. This is a homemade coffee flock made from recycled coffee in yellow, orange, and red. I will put a link down below to Infinite Roleplay's recipe for this flock. Fantastic. And here I'm using some good old leftover pizza seasoning to simulate leaf litter. A little bit more PVA glue down on there, spread the leaf litter, and then I wanted to make it look a little more natural, so I add a little more PVA glue, put the leaf litter on there, and the base looks good for an autumn campsite. A little PVA glue around the base of the tent, and I'm going to set that on that base, let it dry, and that is our campsite piece. So now let's take a look at what our final product looks like. Here it is with a miniature for scale. And a couple other tents that I built as prototypes. If you like what you see here, make sure you leave me a comment down below, hit the old thumbs up like button, and don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends to subscribe. Remember, imagine, build, play. Thank you for watching. MTD.